The reviewer just left a comment on a test file telling the author to use the repository pattern. That pattern belongs to the database models 3 directories away, and this test never touches a database. Nothing crashed and nobody wrote a bug. The reviewer read the rules it was given, and the rules never said where they applied. One engineer set it up on his machine, and for him it worked. 2 more teams started running it, and a new hire on the platform team got none of the conventions at all. Freeze it right there, because the gap between those 3 desks is what this exam turns into a question. Where do you write a convention down so the right one reaches every file it applies to on its own? That question comes from domain 3 on the exam, configuration and workflows, roughly 12 of the 60 questions you'll sit. This episode owns 3 of its task statements, and the rest of the domain is the next episode. The instruction hierarchy, custom commands and skills, and path scope rules that load only where they apply. The coverage map, every task statement against its episode is in the description. The architect question part in the corner. All episode is the second of the 4. What can it touch? Configuration is that question answered in files. So start with where Claude code actually reads them. Start with what broke, because the fault picks the fix. The instruction file is called CLAUDE.md, and several load at once. Broadest first, narrowest speaking last, closest to the work. At the top sits a managed policy file, placed by whoever runs the machine, and no project can reach up and rewrite it. Under that, your own user file in your home directory inside .claude. Then the project file, either at the repository root or inside the project's .claude directory. Then a CLAUDE.md inside a subdirectory. So one corner of the code base can carry rules of its own. And last, a local file which is yours alone and stays out of version control. Now replay the new hire. The first engineer wrote every convention into his user file, and on his machine that worked. A user file belongs to one user on one machine, and it never travels through version control. So the new hire cloned the repository, and the reviewer arrived with none of the conventions. Nothing in the repository looked wrong, because the conventions were never in it. The guide lists that exact diagnosis as a skill, and the shape repeats all over this domain. The instructions themselves are correct, and it's the scope that's wrong. The fix is one move. Team rules live in the project and get committed, or they don't exist for anyone else. And you never guess, because /memory lists every memory file that's loaded with its scope. So every rule moves into the project file, and the file starts to grow. The team's rules all sit in one file now, and everything in that file loads every time, whether the task cares or not. The exam expects 2 ways to break it up, and the first is an import. An @ sign followed by a path pulls another file's content straight into the instruction file. That lets each package in a monorepo pull in only the standards its maintainer actually needs. The second is a rules directory .claude/rules, holding one small file per topic. Testing in one file, API conventions in another, deployment in a third, not one monolith with headings. To a human, the two look the same, but only the rules directory can be made conditional, and that's an exam question. Hold that thought, because a second filing system sits next to yours and you didn't write it. There's a second memory system next to the instruction file, and mixing the two up is an easy mark to drop. CLAUDE.md is what you write. Auto memory is what Claude writes for itself, out of your corrections and your stated preferences. It's on by default. It lives outside the repository, and it's shaped like an index with topic files behind it. The index top loads at the start of every conversation, and the topic file loads only when it turns relevant. Your standards are deliberate, written, and committed. Auto memory accumulates, which makes it the wrong home for a team rule. So deliberate rules live in files you control, and that pays off next, because a rule file can learn to stay quiet. Here is the piece older material tends to miss, and it's the answer to a published question on this exam. A rules file can carry front matter, and that front matter can hold a paths field which takes glob patterns. When the file being worked on matches the pattern, the rule loads. When it doesn't match, the rule never enters context at all. A rule scope to the Terraform tree stays silent everywhere else in the codebase. Two things follow, and both are scored. The first is less irrelevant context, less spent on conventions the task never needed. The second is sharper, and it's the beat this episode exists for. A glob isn't tied to a directory at all. Think about where test files live. Right beside the code they test, in every folder of the tree. Now try to cover them with a subdirectory instruction file. That file reaches its own directory and nothing else, because a directory file is bound to the place it lives in. You'd need a copy in every folder, and the copies would drift apart within a week. A pattern doesn't have that problem. One glob that matches every test file wherever it lives describes all of them in a single rule. So say the rule the way you'll use it on exam day. The rule matches a pattern, not a place. Convention follows a directory file is fine. Convention follows a file type, you need a path scoped rule. Rules now find their own files. The next thing a team shares isn't a rule at all, it's something a developer types. A custom / command is just a file, and where that file sits decides who has the command. In the project under .claude / commands, it's committed, so everyone has it the moment they clone or pull. In your home directory, it's yours alone, and no teammate ever sees it. That's a shape you already know. The location is the sharing model. The guide asks exactly this, and the answer is the project's commands directory, shared the moment anyone pulls. Two distractors are worth naming. The instruction file holds project context, it doesn't define commands, and a config file with a commands array in it just doesn't exist, which is a distractor shape you'll meet again. One more thing here, because it's recent, custom commands have been folded into skills. A commands file called review and a skill folder called review both give you /review, and they behave the same. Which raises the obvious question, if a command is just a skill now, what exactly is a skill? A skill is a directory under .claude/skills with a skill.md inside and supporting files alongside. The property that matters is when it loads. A skill's body stays out of context until the skill is used. The instruction file is the exact opposite, loaded always for every task, relevant or not. So the choice is universality. Universal standards go in the instruction file. Task-specific workflows go in a skill. Frontmatter controls a skill too. An allowed tools list narrows what it can call, so an analysis skill can't write a thing. And a fork option runs the skill in an isolated subagent, so a noisy skills output never lands in the main conversation. Now the three come apart. A command is the name you type, and a skill is the body that loads when it's needed. A subagent is a separate context with its own window, and a skill can be told to run inside one. So a skill isn't a subagent, it can use one, and that difference is often the whole question. That's the whole toolkit. So walk it into the guide's published question. Here is that published question, run at the speed you'd actually use. 3 areas: components in a functional style, API handlers with their own error handling models on a repository pattern. Test files sit beside the code they test, all through the tree, same conventions everywhere. The stem wants the most maintainable way to apply the correct conventions automatically when code is generated. Name the question first, what can it touch? Because every option decides what enters context and when. Option B consolidates every convention into the root instruction file, one heading per area. That loads everything every time and then hopes the right heading gets picked. Hoping isn't matching. B infers, so B is gone. Option D puts an instruction file in every subdirectory, and for the 3 main areas, it works. Then it reaches the test files, which live in every directory at once, while a directory file is bound to exactly one. The rule matches a pattern, not a place, and D can't see a pattern, so D dies on the tests. Option C builds a skill for each code type with the conventions inside it. But a skill loads when it's used, and the stem set automatically, decided by the file path, gone, which leaves a rule files with glob frontmatter matching on the path itself. One pattern covers every test file regardless of folder, one scope rule per area. That's the answer. Notice the word that did the work, automatically it killed the option that needed somebody to choose. Look at where those three desks stand tonight. One committed project file, rules that load only for the paths they match, and skills for what isn't universal. And the test file from the cold open finally gets the right comment. From a rule scope to test files. 2 lines to walk into the exam with. Anything the team depends on lives in the project and gets committed. And when the files are scattered, the rule matches a pattern, not a place. Next time, the same system runs with nobody watching, and the question becomes how far you let it go alone.